My father's final secret was hidden in his beat-up truck. It didn't make me rich, but it changed my life forever. They say you cannot take anything with you when you go. My father apparently figured out how to take even his words. In the last 10 years of his life, he said less to me than what ended up carved on his headstone. Our first real conversation started 3 days after we buried him. I am 48 years old, and I have spent most of those years trying to figure out what I did wrong. Not in some deep philosophical way, but in the specific, practical sense of what exact moment made my old man decide I was not worth talking to. Was it when I dropped out of trade school? When I moved to Des Moines for that construction job that lasted all of 8 months? Or maybe it was earlier, when I was 12 and accidentally left the gate open, and we lost 3 hogs to the highway. He never said. That was his signature move. Silence louder than a shotgun blast. The funeral was on a Tuesday. Farmers do not get Saturday funerals because Saturday is for the living, and living costs money. The church was half full, which in a town of 800 people means you were either respected or owed favors. In Dad's case, probably both. Pastor Williams said all the usual things about hard work and dedication and the Lord's mysterious ways. I sat in the front pew in a suit I bought at JCPenney the night before, and I felt like an actor in a play I had not auditioned for. My sister Jennifer cried. Real tears, the kind that streak mascara. I tried. I really did. But all I could think about was how the last time I saw him alive, he looked at me for maybe 2 seconds, grunted something that might have been hello or might have been indigestion, and went back to watching the Weather Channel. After the service, people lined up to shake my hand and tell me how sorry they were. Mrs. Henderson from the post office squeezed my arm and said Dad was a pillar of the community. Bill Peterson, who owned the hardware store, mentioned how Dad helped him fix his tractor in '98 without asking for a dime. Even Miguel Martinez, whose family farmed the land adjacent to ours, showed up in a clean shirt and told me my father was a man of honor. I nodded and thanked them all, but inside, I was thinking the same thing over and over. You all knew a different man than I did. The house after a funeral has a specific kind of emptiness. It is not peaceful. It is a silence of a conversation that ended mid-sentence. I walked through rooms that smelled like old wood and older regrets, and every creak of the floorboards felt like an accusation. The neighbors did what small-town neighbors do. They brought food, lots of food, 3 separate casseroles, all identical, all featuring cream of mushroom soup and crushed potato chips on top. Someone brought a ham that could feed a battalion. Mrs. Chun from the bank left a fruit basket with a card that had a Bible verse I did not read. In our town, grief tastes like baked cheese and canned soup. It is the same meal whether you are mourning a saint or a stranger. I was standing in the kitchen, staring at the casseroles like they were some kind of modern art installation, when Jennifer's car pulled up, a sleek silver sedan that looked as out of place on our gravel driveway as a lawyer at a rodeo. She had married well. Richard worked in something involving computers and conferences in hotel ballrooms. They lived in a suburb of Chicago with actual sidewalks and a homeowners association. She stepped out wearing black slacks and a tasteful blouse, and even in grief, she looked like she had it together. I was in jeans and a flannel shirt that probably smelled like the barn. The contrast was not subtle. Jennifer hugged me on the porch. A real hug, not one of those side squeeze things people do when they're uncomfortable. For a moment, she felt like my big sister again. Not the person who sends Christmas cards with those generic printed newsletters about her kids' achievements. But then she pulled back and looked at the house. Really looked at it. Her eyes scanned the peeling paint on the window frames, the sag in the porch roof, the way the front steps tilted just slightly to the left. I saw her doing mental calculations, the same way Dad used to look at a broken fence and estimate the cost of lumber. We went inside and I made coffee. The cheap kind that comes in a massive tin and tastes like it was brewed through a gym sock. Jennifer did not complain. She sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we ate cereal before school 30 years ago, and wrapped her hands around the mug like she was trying to absorb warmth from it. We made small talk for a while. How was the drive? How were her kids? Whether the funeral service was nice. All the surface-level stuff you say when the real conversation is waiting in the corner like a dog that needs to be put down. Then her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, frowned, and stepped into the living room to take it. I was not trying to eavesdrop, but the house was small and the walls were thin, and I heard her talking to Richard in that low, urgent voice married people use when they are trying not to fight in public. I do not know how we are going to do this, Richard. I just do not know. She said it quietly, like a prayer to a God who stopped listening years ago. And that is when I understood. This was not just about grief. This was about money. When she came back, her smile was tighter. She sat down, took a sip of terrible coffee, and got to the point. She started gently. Talked about how much the house meant to both of us. How Dad worked so hard. How it was a shame the farm never quite made it into the 21st century. How land values in Iowa were actually pretty decent right now, all things considered. I let her talk. I have learned over the years that when someone is winding up to ask you for something, interrupting just delays the inevitable. Finally, she put her mug down and looked me straight in the eye. Mike, we need to talk about selling. There it was. The thing we had both been thinking since the doctor told us Dad's heart finally gave out in the barn while he was trying to fix a combine older than me. I should have been angry. Part of me wanted to be. But mostly I just felt tired. Tired in that bone-deep way that comes from 48 years of being the disappointment in the room. Jennifer laid it all out, calmly, logically, like she was presenting a case to a jury. The farm was not profitable. Had not been for years. Dad kept it running on stubbornness and duct tape. The equipment was ancient. The house needed a new roof, new plumbing, probably knew everything. The land was the only thing worth anything, and even that was mortgaged to the hilt. She pulled out her phone. The sleek black rectangle seemed to suck the light out of the rustic kitchen. She swiped the screen and bright, sharp numbers lit up her face. Property assessments, comparable sales, tax records. That glowing screen resting on the scarred, water-stained oak of the kitchen table felt like a spaceship landing in the middle of a Civil War battlefield. She had done her homework. Of course she had. Jennifer always did her homework. Straight A's all through school, while I was pulling C's and pretending I did not care. Mike, she said, we cannot afford sentiments. Sentiments do not pay mortgages. She was not wrong. Her kids were in private school. Richard's company had gone through layoffs. They had stretched themselves thin in ways that people in cities do, betting on futures that might not come. And then she said something that landed like a punch to the gut. Dad was hard as a rock, but he would not want us to drown holding onto that rock. I wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she did not know what Dad would have wanted. But the truth was, I did not know either. Nobody did. The man took his thoughts to the grave along with whatever love he might have had for his screw-up son. I sat there, looking at my sister with her spreadsheets and her logic, and her fear hiding behind practical words. And I realized she was not the villain here. She was scared. Scared of losing her house. Scared of failing her kids. Scared of ending up like us, in a town where the biggest excitement is the new Dollar General. I thought about my own situation. My checking account with $400 and change. The truck outside that needed new tires and probably a new transmission. The construction jobs that dried up every winter, leaving me to scramble for whatever work I could find. I was not exactly in a position to play the noble son, keeping the family legacy alive. The family legacy. That was a joke. What legacy? 160 acres of mediocre soil and fading memories? A house that groaned every time the wind picked up? A barn full of equipment that belonged in a museum? Jennifer kept talking, filling the silence I left hanging. She mentioned a realtor she knew. Someone who specialized in agricultural properties. Someone who could get us a fair price. Maybe even a good price if we were lucky. She made it sound so reasonable. So simple. Just sign some papers. Let someone else deal with the headaches. Take the money and move on with our lives. I got up and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was setting over fields that looked like they were auditioning for a Depression-era photograph. Brown and tired and used up, just like everything else around here. I thought about Dad standing in those same fields, year after year, season after season, breaking his back for land, that barely broke even. What was the point? What was he holding on to? Pride? Stubbornness? Some idea of what a man is supposed to do? Jennifer came up beside me. She did not touch me, but I could feel her there, waiting for an answer. I have kids to think about. Mike, Richard is not doing great at work. I am not trying to be cold. I am trying to survive. And that was the thing, was it not? We were all just trying to survive. Dad survived by working himself to death. Jennifer was surviving by making hard choices. And me, I was surviving by being exactly what everyone expected, the son who could not quite measure up. I turned to face her. She looked hopeful and guilty at the same time, like someone asking for forgiveness for a sin they have not committed yet. You are right, I told her. The words tasted like metal in my mouth. You are right about all of it. Her shoulders dropped with relief. She actually smiled a little. So you will think about it? I will do more than think about it, I said. Call your realtor friend. Let us hear what they have to say. Jennifer actually hugged me again. Thanked me for being reasonable, for understanding, for being mature about this. I hugged her back and lied through my teeth about how it was the right thing to do. That night, after Jennifer went to bed in her old room upstairs, I sat on the porch with a beer that had gone warm in my hand. The stars were out, the kind of stars you cannot see in cities. My father used to sit in this exact spot every night after dinner. Never said much, just sat. My hand rested on the arm of the rocking chair, the wood worn smooth and concave right where his elbow would have been. Generations of silence had polished it better than any varnish. I wondered what he thought about out here, whether he regretted his choices, whether he looked at me and saw a wasted potential or just a different kind of man. I thought about all the years I spent trying to earn a word of approval that never came. All the times I drove out here, hoping maybe this visit would be different. Maybe he would ask about my life. Maybe he would act like I mattered. He never did, and now he never would. So why was I hesitating? Why did the idea of selling this place feel like betraying something I could not even name? Maybe because it was the only thing left that connected me to him. Even if that connection was made of silence and disappointment. Even if keeping it meant drowning in debt and regret. I finished a warm beer and set the bottle down on the porch railing, where it would probably sit until it filled with rainwater. Tomorrow, Jennifer would make calls, set up meetings, get the ball rolling on selling off everything my father built, and I would let her, because what else was I going to do? Die on this hill? Die on this land? Dad already did that. One of us was enough. I stood up, stretched my back, and went inside. The house was dark except for the light over the kitchen sink that Dad always left on. I turned it off. Time to let go. Time to move on. Time to finally accept that some things are worth more dead than alive. Tomorrow, we would start the process of turning my father's life into a dollar amount. And maybe, if we were lucky, that amount would be enough to let us both pretend we did not feel like garbage about it. I went upstairs to bed, but I did not sleep much. Just lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, and wondering if ghosts are just stubborn men who build a place so solid it refuses to let them go completely. Chuck Wall showed up 2 days later in a truck that had never seen mud. A Chevy Silverado with chrome so shiny it could blind you. The kind of vehicle that gets washed twice a week at one of those places where they detail the undercarriage. He stepped out wearing a suit that probably cost more than my truck was worth. And the first thing he did was flash that smile. You know the one. The smile that says I am about to make you feel like we are old friends while I calculate exactly how much money I can extract from this situation. Chuck and I went to high school together. He played quarterback. I played nothing. He dated the homecoming queen. I dated her friend who felt sorry for me. Back then, he had the same smile, just with cheaper teeth. He walked up the driveway like he owned it already, which I guess in a way he was about to. His shoes were the kind you see in magazine ads. The leather so perfect it looked like it had never touched actual ground. Each step kicked up a little puff of Iowa dust that seemed personally offended by his presence. Your old man was a legend, he said, extending his hand. A real tough nut. But business is business, right? He slapped me on the shoulder, like we were buddies reminiscing about Friday night football games. Like he had not spent senior year, making fun of my used Carhartt jacket, while he wore a different brand name windbreaker every week. I shook his hand because that is what you do in small towns. You shake hands with people you would rather punch. Social contract and all that. Jennifer came out onto the porch, and Chuck turned on a charm like flipping a light switch. He complimented her hair, asked about her kids by name, which meant he had done his homework or had a very good assistant. She ate it up, or maybe she was just desperate enough to eat anything that looked like hope. We sat at the kitchen table again, the same table where Jennifer had shown me the numbers on her spaceship phone. Chuck pulled out a leather portfolio that probably cost more than a week of groceries. Inside were papers, lots of papers, the kind with logos at the top and signatures at the bottom and dense paragraphs in between that are designed to make you feel stupid for trying to read them. He spread them out like a poker player, revealing a royal flush. AgriCorp Midwest, he said, tapping the logo with a manicured finger. They are expanding their operations in the region, looking to consolidate smaller properties into efficient, large-scale farming operations. Very cutting edge, sustainable, all that good stuff. He said sustainable the way people say organic at the grocery store, like it was a magic word that made everything okay. The number was right there at the top of the first page, $800,000. My hand, resting on my knee under the table, clenched into a fist so tight my knuckles ached. I stared at it. Those zeros lined up like soldiers at attention. More money than I had ever seen in one place. More money than my father probably made in his entire life of breaking his back over dirt that sometimes cooperated and mostly did not. Jennifer's face when she saw that number, I will never forget it. It was the look of someone drowning who just spotted a boat. Her eyes went wide, then immediately tried to hide it, tried to look calm and reasonable. But I saw it, that flash of pure relief. For me, it felt different, like someone was offering me a life preserver made of concrete. Sure, it might save me. It might also drag me straight to the bottom. Chuck walked us through the details with the practiced ease of someone who had given this pitch 100 times. The corporation wanted the land, just the land. They would handle demolition of the buildings. We would not have to worry about clearing anything out. They would even give us 60 days to remove any personal items we want to keep. How generous, I thought. 60 days to pack up a lifetime. He used phrases like fair market value and competitive offer and streamlined closing process. Each word was smooth and empty, like river stones worn down by water. Nothing rough, nothing real, just smooth enough to slip through your fingers. They want the dirt, Mike, he said, leaning back in his chair. Not the house, not the barn, not the memories. Just the dirt. And let's be honest, dirt is dirt. You can buy memories. You cannot buy opportunity. I wanted to tell him he had that backward, but I did not. Jennifer asked the practical questions. Timeline, closing costs, tax implications. She had her phone out, taking notes. Planning, already spending money she did not have yet. Chuck answered everything perfectly. He had clearly done this before. Probably sat at a dozen kitchen tables just like this one, convincing people to sell off pieces of their souls with PowerPoint slides and assurances that it was all for the best. I mostly sat there, feeling like a spectator at my own funeral, watching these two people discuss the dollar value of everything my father ever touched, reducing a life to line items and legal terminology. At one point, Chuck turned to me and asked if I had any questions. His eyes were friendly, too friendly. The kind of friendly that is really just professional courtesy with better lighting. I asked him if he had ever been on a farm before today. Actually worked on one, not just driven past him on the way to somewhere more important. He laughed. Not a real laugh. The kind you do when someone asks an uncomfortable question at a dinner party. Let us just say I have a deep appreciation for producers who form the backbone of our nation's food security, he said, sounding like he was reading from a corporate brochure. My job is to help them leverage their assets for a secure retirement. It is a different kind of harvest, Leverage their assets. Different kind of harvest. All the right words strung together in exactly the wrong way. None of them true. After Chuck left, trailing a cloud of expensive cologne and false sincerity, Jennifer and I sat in the sudden quiet. The papers were still spread across the table. That number still visible at the top. 800,000 reasons to let go. She looked at me with hope and fear mixed in equal measure. The same look she had when we were kids. And she would ask me to go first into the dark basement to make sure there were no monsters. This could solve everything, Mike. She said, quietly. Everything. I knew what she meant. The tuition payments. The mortgage. The credit cards maxed out on try to keep up with neighbors who probably had maxed out credit cards of their own. The treadmill of American middle-class life, where you run faster and faster just to stay in the same place. I got up and went to window. Outside, I could see across the fields to Henderson's place. There was a moving truck in his driveway. Had been there since yesterday. The bank had foreclosed on him last month. 50 years of farming, gone because of 3 bad harvests and a loan he never should have taken out. I watched as they loaded furniture into that truck. A couch, some chairs, a dining table not unlike the one behind me. Henderson's whole life, reduced to items someone else would buy at an estate sale. That could be us, I thought. That is us, just delayed by a few months. Jennifer came up beside me. She saw what I was seeing. The silent warning. The preview of our future, if we did nothing. We cannot let that happen, she said. You understand that, right? We cannot end up like that. I understood. God help me. I understood perfectly. That evening, we sat on the porch. Same place my father sat every night. Same worn spot on a rocking chair arm where his elbow had polished the wood smooth. The sun was setting, painting the fields in shades of amber and rust. Beautiful in that way that dying things sometimes are. Jennifer had been quiet since Chuck left, just sitting there, probably running numbers in her head, calculating futures and probabilities. She was always good at math. I was always good at avoiding it. Finally, she spoke. So what do you think, Mike? 4 words. Simple question, but loaded with the weight of everything we had been dancing around since Dad's funeral. I looked out at those fields. The same fields my father walked every morning before sunrise. The same dirt he bled into when a tractor rolled and crushed his leg back in '84. The same land that never gave him anything easy but that he held on to with both hands until his heart gave out in a barn that probably should have been condemned years ago. What would he want? That was the question that kept circling in my head like a vulture. What would my father, who said maybe 300 words to me in the last decade of his life, want me to do with his land? I had no idea. That was the truth of it. I did not know him well enough to guess. Maybe that was the real inheritance. Not the land or the debt or the crumbling buildings. Just the not knowing. The permanent question mark where a relationship should have been. Jennifer was still waiting for an answer. Patient. Desperate. Both. I thought about my own life. The jobs that came and went. The apartments in cities with names I barely remembered. The women who left because I was never quite present, always looking backward at something I could not name. The crushing ordinariness of a life spent trying to be anyone other than my father's son. And here I was, the only thing standing between his legacy and a bulldozer. Some legacy. Some son. Okay, I said finally. Okay, Jen. Call your Chuck. The words came out flat. No emotion. Just surrender dressed up as decision. She let out a breath I did not realize she had been holding. Relief washed over her face like someone had just pulled her out of dark water. She stood up, and for a moment, I thought she might hug me again. Instead, she just squeezed my shoulder. Thank you, she said. Thank you for being reasonable. Reasonable. That was the word she used. Like this was a math problem we had just solved together. Plug in the variables. Get the right answer. Simple. She went inside to make calls. To set the machinery in motion. To convert land into money and memories into something that fits in a bank account. I stayed on the porch. Alone. The sun was almost gone now. Just a thin line of red on the horizon. The fields were turning from gold to shadow. In an hour, they would be completely dark, just like everything else. All my life, I tried to prove to my father that I was worth something, that I mattered, that I was not just a son who disappointed him by existing wrong. I never got that proof. Never got the words or the nod or whatever it was I was searching for. And now, my greatest achievement will be selling off everything he built, turning a lifetime of work into a number on a piece of paper, letting some corporation with a sustainable agriculture plan bulldoze the buildings and plant GMO corn in perfectly straight rows. He would be so proud. The irony was not lost on me. Spent my whole life running from this place, running from him, running from the ghost of the man I was supposed to be, and here I was about to sell it all for just enough money to keep running a little while longer. Inside, I could hear Jennifer on the phone. Her voice had that excited pitch people get when they think they have found a solution, when they think the worst is behind them. I knew better. The worst is never behind you. It is always right there, sitting in your chest, wearing your father's face and your own failures like matching tattoo sleeves. But maybe she was right. Maybe this was the smart choice, the practical choice, the reasonable choice. Maybe letting go was the same thing as growing up. Maybe holding on was just another word for drowning. I stood up, my back cracked in 3 places. 48 years of construction work and poor decisions, all documented in my spine. I walked to the edge of the porch and looked out one more time. The Henderson place was dark now. The moving truck was gone. Just an empty house with a foreclosure notice on the door. Another family farm turned into a cautionary tale. We were next, except we were selling before they could take it. That made it better somehow. More dignified. Choosing to walk away instead of being dragged. At least that is what I told myself. Inside, Jennifer was still on the phone. I heard her laugh at something. Actual laughter. When was the last time I heard her laugh? Probably before her father died and left her with nothing but debt and decisions. I walked through the living room, past the couch that sagged in the middle, past the TV that only got 3 channels, past the photographs on the wall of people who looked like me but happier, younger, less defeated. I went to the kitchen and opened the fridge. 3 casseroles barely touched. A 6-pack with 2 beers left. Some condiments old enough to vote. This was what remained of a life. This was what we were selling. This and 160 acres of stubborn dirt. I took one of the beers and opened it. Drank half of it standing there in the fluorescent light of the kitchen, listening to my sister plan our exit strategy from a place that was already gone. Tomorrow, Chuck would come back with more papers. We would sign things. Initial things. Probably notarized things. The gears would turn, and in 60 days, this would all belong to AgriCorp Midwest. They would send crews to tear down the barn, demolish the house, erase every trace that anyone named Walsh had ever tried to grow anything here besides regret. And I would take my share of $800,000 and do what exactly? Buy a newer truck? Rent a better apartment? Pretend that money could fill the space where a father's approval should have been? Jennifer came into the kitchen, her face flushed with relief and something that looked almost like happiness. They can start the paperwork tomorrow, she said. Chuck says if everything goes smoothly, we could close in 6 weeks. Maybe less. 6 weeks. A lifetime packed up in 6 weeks. That is great, I said. Really great. She hugged me then. A real hug. Held on tight, like I had just saved her life. Maybe I had. Maybe that was worth something. Maybe saving your sister's future was more important than preserving your father's past. Maybe. She went upstairs, probably to call Richard with the good news. Probably to finally breathe without that weight on her chest. I was happy for her. I really was. I finished the beer and set the bottle on the counter. Next to it was a stack of mail, mostly junk. Bills addressed to a dead man. Catalogs for farm equipment he would never buy. A reminder that even death does not stop the machinery of American commerce. I should have felt relief too. Should have felt like we had solved the problem, made the smart choice, done the reasonable thing. Instead, I felt like I had just agreed to burn down a museum because the heating bills were too high. I turned off the kitchen light, the one Dad always left on. Habit, his habit, now mine. Soon it would be nobody's habit. Soon it would be demolished. I went upstairs to the bedroom I slept in as a kid. The bed was the same. The curtains were the same. Even the water stain on the ceiling was the same, shaped like a map of Florida, if Florida was drawn by someone who had never seen Florida. I laid down without undressing, just stared up at that water stain, and thought about all the nights I had spent in this room, trying to figure out how to be someone my father could stand to look at. Turned out the answer was simple. Become someone willing to sell everything he was. Tomorrow, the paperwork would start, the machinery would turn, and I would officially become the son who let go, the son who chose money over meaning, the son who was reasonable. Outside, the wind picked up, the house creaked and settled. All these old buildings talk if you listen. They tell stories about the people who built them and the people who abandoned them. I listened to the house settle into darkness and wondered if regret sounded different than guilt. Probably not. Probably they both just sounded like floorboards at 3 a.m, refusing to stay quiet. The next morning, I woke up with a mission. Not a good mission. Not a noble one. Just the kind of thing a man does when he is about to lose everything and wants one last piece of proof that it mattered at all. I was looking for a toolbox. Not just any toolbox. A specific one. Wood, not metal. Handmade, not store-bought. My father built it for me when I was 10 years old. Dovetail joints. Careful sanding. Even carved my initials on the lid. M.W. Michael Walsh. Back when I was still young enough to think those initials meant something. Back when I thought maybe I could be the kind of son who deserved a handmade toolbox. I was not that son. Threw it in the barn during some teenage argument I cannot even remember now. Probably something about him not coming to a baseball game or telling me I held a hammer wrong. The usual father-son stuff that feels world-ending when you are 15 and feels stupid when you're 48. But I wanted to find it. Needed to find it. Some kind of proof that there was a moment, even just one moment, when he looked at me and saw potential instead of disappointment. The barn was exactly as dark and dusty as you'd expect from a building that had given up trying years ago. Sunlight came through the gaps in the walls like prison bars. Everything smelled like oil and rust and time running out. I picked through boxes, old tools, broken machinery, a saddle from a horse we had when I was 6. Each item was a memory I did not particularly want to revisit, but I kept looking, kept searching for that stupid wooden box and whatever redemption I thought it might contain. That is when I saw the truck. Dad's old Ford F-150, 1984, blue, or at least it used to be blue before the sun, and the years turned it into the color of old bruises. It sat in the corner of the barn, like a monument to stubbornness. Engine probably had not turned over in a decade. Tires were flat. Windows were cloudy with dust. But it was his. The truck knew more about my father than I ever would. I walked over to it, each step kicking up small clouds of barn dust that hung in the air like ghosts. I ran my hand along the hood. The metal was cool and gritty. There was a faded bumper sticker that said something about supporting local farmers, the letters so worn you could barely read them anymore. I opened the driver's side door. It groaned like it was in pain. The smell hit me immediately. Old vinyl. Stale tobacco. Work gloves left too long in the heat. It smelled like him. Like every ride to the hardware store. Every silent trip into town. Every wordless hour spent sitting next to a man who had run out of things to say to me before I was old enough to understand what silence meant. The seat was cracked. Springs poking through. There was a coffee stain on the dashboard that had probably been there since the 90s. A John Deere cap on the passenger seat, sweat-stained and permanent. This was not a vehicle. This was a time capsule. This was my father's entire personality, preserved in rust and worn upholstery. I sat down in the driver's seat. The springs complained. Dust rose up around me like I was disturbing something that should have been left alone. I opened the glove compartment, thinking maybe the toolbox keys were in there. Practical thinking. The kind of thinking that gets you through life without falling apart. What I found instead was a ledger book. Old, leather cover worn smooth. The kind of thing accountants use before computers, before spreadsheets. When a man's finances fit in something you could hold in your hand. I pulled it out. Dust cascaded off it like sand. The leather was warm from sitting in a closed metal box for who knows how many years. I flipped it open not expecting much. Just another piece of Dad's world that would mean nothing to me. The first pages were exactly what you would expect. Seed corn, $200. Fuel, $80. Fertilizer, $150. Line after line of expenses written in my father's tight, careful handwriting. The penmanship of a man who measured twice and cut once, who wasted nothing, not even ink. I almost threw it back in the glove compartment, almost closed that chapter, and went back to looking for a wooden box that probably got burned for firewood years ago. But something made me flip to the end. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the last gasp of hope that somewhere in these pages was an explanation for the man who raised me without ever really seeing me. The last page had a different heading. Other accounts. Under it, a list of names. Familiar names. People from town. Our neighbors. Families I grew up around. Bill Peterson, fence repair. Paid in full with Martha's casserole, better than ours. I blinked. Read it again. This was not a normal ledger entry. This was something else. The young family, harvest help, paid in full. Their boy helped me with the roof. I kept reading. Each entry was like this. A name, a service, a debt. But the payments were not in dollars. They were in favors, in trades, in the kind of currency that does not exist on paper, but holds communities together when money runs out. Mrs. Chun loaned during the bad winter, paid in full, plowed her driveway every storm for 3 years. Henderson, tractor repair, paid in full. I taught his grandson to drive stick. And then I saw it, the last entry, longer than the others, written in the same careful handwriting, but with something different about it. Something that looked like it was written slower, with more weight. Martinez family, 40 acres. Debt, their pride. Agreement. A handshake stronger than any paper. Paid in full. I stared at those words. Read them 3 times. 4. The barn was silent except for the sound of my own breathing and the distant creak of its settling. 40 acres. The Martinez family farmed 40 acres that bordered our land. I knew that. Everyone knew that. What I did not know, what nobody talked about, was that those 40 acres used to be ours. My father gave them 40 acres. Not sold, gave. And the only record of it was this entry in a book nobody was supposed to see. The memory came back like a slap. I must have been 8, maybe 9. I was playing the yard, and I saw my father and old Martinez standing by the fence line, the border between our properties. They were not arguing. They were just standing there, talking, the way men do when words are not the point. I remember my father pulling out a flask, silver, dented. He took a drink and passed it to Martinez. Martinez drank and passed it back. They stood there a moment longer. Then they shook hands. Not the quick handshake you give a stranger. The long kind. The kind that seals something bigger than a transaction. Then they walked away in opposite directions. My father came back to the house. Never said a word about it. I never asked. Kids do not ask about things they do not understand. But now, standing in this barn with a dusty ledger in my hands, I understood. That was not a business deal. That was an oath. Martinez had been in trouble. I did not know the details. Did not need to. Farm trouble all looks the same. Bad harvest, medical bills, bank breathing down your neck. The kind of trouble that ends with foreclosure signs and moving trucks. My father gave him 40 acres. Just gave it to him. No contract. No lawyers. Just a handshake and a drink and an agreement that some debts are paid in ways that do not show up on tax forms. And the payment? Their pride. Paid in full. Because Martinez did not take it as charity. He took it as a loan from a neighbor. And he paid it back by being the kind of man who showed up when someone else needed help. By being there for his community. By keeping his word even when nobody was watching. That was the currency my father understood. Not dollars. Not zeros on a piece of paper. But the weight of a man's word in a place where your word was all that separated you from being someone people could count on or someone people had to watch out for. I looked out through the barn door, across the fields, I could see the Martinez place from here. The house. The barn. The land that was ours until my father decided it should be theirs. 40 acres. Right in the middle of what AgriCorp wanted to buy. Right in the middle of the $800,000 that Jennifer was counting on. Right in the middle of the reasonable, practical solution to all our problems. Except those 40 acres were not ours. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. My father had made an agreement. Stronger than paper. Stronger than any contract Chuck Walsh could draw up. And the only proof was this book in my hands and the memory of 2 men drinking from a dented flask at a fence line. I closed the ledger, held it against my chest. My heart was pounding in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion and everything to do with the sudden realization that I had been about to do something unforgivable. We were going to sell land that did not belong to us. We were going to take money for something my father had given away. We were going to break an oath made between men who understood that some things are worth more than their market value. I thought about Chuck Walsh and his suit and his smooth words about leveraging assets. I thought about Jennifer and her spreadsheets and her fear. I thought about myself and my entire life spent trying to figure out what my father wanted from me. And now I knew he wanted me to be the kind of man who kept his word even when it cost everything. I walked back to the house with the ledger under my arm. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from exhaustion, from understanding, from the weight of knowing what I had to do and knowing it was going to destroy the fragile piece Jennifer and I had just built. The house was quiet when I walked in. Morning light coming through the kitchen windows. The coffee pot was on. Jennifer was probably still upstairs, maybe on the phone with Richard, telling him the good news, telling him they were saved. I set the ledger on the kitchen table, right in the center, where it could not be missed. Then I waited. Jennifer came downstairs 20 minutes later. She was smiling, actually smiling. Probably the first real smile I had seen on her face since Dad died. She had her phone in her hand, and she was talking about timelines and closing dates and how the lawyer said everything looked straightforward. She saw me sitting there, and her smile got wider. Mike, I just talked to Chuck, and he says we can probably close even faster than we thought. Maybe 4 weeks. Can you believe it? 4 weeks, and we can finally move on. I did not say anything, just pushed the ledger toward her. She looked at it, looked at me. Her smile faltered. What is this? Read the last page, I said. She sat down, picked up the ledger like it might bite her, flipped to the last page. I watched her eyes scan the entries, watched the confusion set in, then the irritation, then something harder to define. Mike, what is this supposed to be? It is Dad's real ledger, I said, the one where he kept track of the things that mattered. She read the Martinez entry. Read it again, then looked up at me with an expression I had never seen before. Part anger, part desperation, part something that looked like heartbreak. This is not a legal document, she said. Her voice was tight, controlled, the way people sound when they are trying very hard not to scream. This is just his notes, his personal business. It does not mean anything. It means we do not own 40 acres of what we are about to sell. She slammed the ledger shut, actually slammed it. The sound echoed in the kitchen like a gunshot. That is ridiculous, she said. That land has been in our family for decades. There is no deed transfer, no legal anything. This is just Dad being Dad, making promises he had no right to make. He had every right, I said quietly. It was his land, and now it is ours, she shot back. And we have bills. Real bills, Mike, not handshake deals and honor codes. Real money that real people need to survive. I know. Then what are we even talking about? She stood up, started pacing. This is insane. You want to blow up our deal because of some notes in a dusty book? You want to tell Chuck Walsh that we cannot sell because Dad made some gentleman's agreement nobody can even verify? She stopped pacing, looked at me with something close to hatred. Richard is hanging on by a thread at work. My kids need braces and college funds and 1,000 things I cannot afford. You do not have kids, Mike. You do not understand what it is like to watch your children worry about things children should not have to worry about. And you wanted to throw away $800,000 because of your sudden attack of conscience about a father who barely acknowledged you existed? That last part hit like a fist, because it was true. All of it was true. Maybe you are right, I said. Maybe Dad was a bad father. Maybe he cared more about strangers than his own kids. But he was a man of his word. And right now, I can either sell his land or keep his word. I cannot do both. She sat back down, put her head in her hands. When she spoke again, her voice was different, smaller, broken. I cannot do this, Mike. I cannot keep pretending everything is fine. Richard might lose his job. The medical bills from Mom are still coming in. The kids need so much, and I have nothing left to give them. This money was supposed to save us. It was supposed to fix everything. She looked up at me with tears running down her face. Dad was a saint to everyone but us. He helped every neighbor, fixed every fence, solved every problem except the ones in his own house. And now you want to honor that? You want to keep his promises while his own children drown? I had no answer, because she was right, about all of it. But I thought about that handshake, about my father and Martinez standing at a fence line, about the kind of men who kept their word when nobody was watching, about the kind of legacy that does not show up in bank statements. Maybe Dad was a terrible father, I said. Maybe he should have put us first. But he did not. And now we get to decide what kind of people we are. Do we become people who break his word for money? Or do we become people who keep it even when it costs everything? Jennifer wiped her eyes, laughed, not a happy laugh. The kind of laugh that comes when you realize the universe has a terrible sense of humor. You are seriously choosing a dead man's honor over living children. I am choosing to be someone I can look at in the mirror. She stood up, grabbed her purse, walked to the door, then stopped. I love you, Mike, but I cannot afford your principles. She left. The door closed quietly behind her. No slamming, just a soft click of someone walking away from a sinking ship. I sat there for a long time, alone in the kitchen, the ledger still on the table, the coffee pot still on, the casserole still in the fridge. I thought about calling her back, about compromising, about finding some middle ground where everyone got something and nobody got everything. But I knew there was no middle ground. Not for this. Either I honor my father's word, or I did not. Either I was his son in the ways that mattered, or I was just someone who happened to share his DNA. I picked up the ledger, walked out the door, started across the field toward the Martinez place. It was a longer walk than I remembered, or maybe I was just slower than I used to be. The sun was high and hot. The dirt under my feet was the same dirt my father walked every day. The same dirt he broke his back over. The same dirt he gave away because he believed some things were worth more than their market value. The Martinez house was small but well kept, paint fresh, garden tidy. The barn was in better shape than ours, because Martinez had not just survived on those 40 acres. He had thrived, built something real, something that would last. I knocked on the door. Hector Martinez answered, not his father. The old man had passed a few years back, but Hector was around my age. We went to school together, different crowds, but we knew each other the way everyone in a small town knows everyone. He looked surprised to see me, probably wondering why his neighbor was standing on his porch holding an old book and looking like he had just walked through a spiritual crisis. Mike, he said, I am sorry about your father. He was a good man. I know, I said, and then I handed him the ledger, open to the last page. He read it, slow, careful, the way you read something that changes everything. When he looked up, his eyes had something in them I had not seen in a long time. Respect, understanding, the kind of recognition that happens between people who know what it costs to keep your word. He did not say I am sorry or thank you or any of the hollow phrases people use when they do not know what to say. Instead, he smiled, small but real. My father always said yours was the stubbornest, most honest son of a gun he ever knew. Guess it runs in the family. We shook hands, long and firm, the way my father and his father had shaken hands at a fence line 20 years ago. The way men do when words are not enough, but the gesture says everything. I walked back across the field, lighter somehow, even though I had just given away $400,000, even though I had no idea what came next. When I got back to the house, Jennifer was gone. Her car was gone. Most of her things were gone. She left a note on the kitchen table. I called Chuck, told him the deal is off. I cannot be part of this. I am sorry, Mike. I hope you find whatever it is you are looking for. She had signed it love, Jen, like that made it better. Or maybe she meant it. Maybe she did love me, just not enough to drown with me. We ended up selling the rest of the farm, the parts that were actually ours. It was enough to split. Jennifer got her half, enough to stay afloat. Not enough to solve everything, but enough to keep going. I got my half, paid off Dad's debts, covered the funeral expenses, had just enough left over to disappoint myself with. I left town 2 weeks later, drove away in my truck that still needed new tires. Everything I owned fit in the back. 48 years of life, packed into boxes and trash bags. As I drove past the Martinez place, Hector was outside. He raised his hand. I raised mine back. No words. None needed. People probably think I am an idiot, that I threw away a fortune over a dead man's notebook, that I chose principle over practicality, and got exactly what people like me deserve. Nothing. Maybe they are right. But for the first time in longer than I can remember, I looked in the rearview mirror and did not hate the face looking back at me. My father left me a broken-down farm and a ledger full of forgiven debts. Turned out that was more than enough to buy back something I thought I lost a long time ago. My own soul, worn, dented, but mine. And in the end, that was the only inheritance that mattered.